Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime basketball and football beat reporter Jim Polzin. Got some stuff going on, some breaking news this week throughout both of our sports here. Going to get into all of that. We had a couple of basketball games since the last time we talked, Jim. Basketball is kind of picking up the pieces after a tough showing at Michigan. Seems like they're getting a little bit more like what they want to be.
Yeah, a couple wins that were, I don't know if I'd call them impressive, but I think winning at Rutgers was something they hadn't done since Rutgers joined the Big Ten. I thought that was important to get that win and at least end like we talked last week at this time about you want to go on this road trip and at least split. And so they did that. It wasn't pretty, but they did it. I thought last night, especially in the second half, was more like we thought this team could look. So
sure, I
think they're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So lots of stuff to talk about, mostly with basketball today. We'll do some quick football off the top. They named a new defensive line coach. Ross Kolodziej has been on the football staff as the head strength and conditioning coach, former UW defensive lineman. He's going to move over to the defensive line coaching job. So we're going to talk about that to start off with. Then we're going to get into basketball. Some news came out last night after the game that Lorne Bowman, the should be freshman or would have been freshman on this team right now, is re-enrolled back in the university. So we're going to cover that. Talk about these two games in the last week, Rutgers and Northwestern, where UW kind of stands right now and how they're looking, and then kind of look forward here because this is a really important stretch coming up for the Badgers. 4 winnable games coming on a 2-game win streak here, so potential to get rolling late here in January. And then talk a little bit about guys that we've been talking about a little bit before on the podcast, but continue to play well, like Demetric Trice. Jim had a really good story leading up to games this week about how well Trice has been doing at the rim and how that's improved his scoring. So we're going to talk about that. And then this change in the starting lineup, which we didn't really expect. I mean, it was pretty consistent all throughout last year and early to start this year, but Tyler Wahl coming into the starting lineup for Nate Reavers. So lots of stuff to talk about, and we'll get into all of it right after this. All right, Jim, let's start off with football here. Ross Kolodziej, as I mentioned off the top, moving from the strength and conditioning coach position to the defensive line coach position. Pretty natural fit for him as a guy that, played multiple years in the NFL on the defensive line, was a really good player when he was here at Wisconsin under Barry Alvarez. I was a little bit surprised because it has been radio silent about potential candidates, maybe guys coming in for interviews or who they were talking about. And then all of a sudden on a Wednesday afternoon, a little bit before a basketball game, it gets tweeted out, oh, Ross Kolodziej is moving over here. So just what was your take on that when you saw that last night?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And yet I didn't see it coming at all. I mean, if that, that's, you don't often get those two scenarios, but I didn't even consider it, even though, I've known Ross for a while and he certainly, his background is on the defensive line. It makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that it was something he wanted to get back into. I think, and I don't know his personal life, where his kids are age-wise or anything like that. If he even has kids, I'm not,
yeah, he's got 4 kids.
4 kids. Okay. So like usually you don't see guys jump into the recruiting aspect. That's really the biggest change. I mean, he's going to be spending just as much time in the facility as he did before. But now he'll go on the road more often. So apparently he thought it was, a good time to do that, make that transition. And, I think he'll do a good job. There's some people grumbling on Twitter yesterday that he has no experience. Either did Jim Leonard when he made the transition. It's not like these guys don't know football. He certainly knows the program. He knows these players. I think it's a good fit. I think the bigger question now is replacing him as the strength and conditioning coach. I've always thought that position is such an important position. Those guys are with the players every day, basically in the off season. And that's where a lot of the development work gets done in terms of, getting them bigger and better, more agile. So replacing him as a strength and conditioning coach, I think will be a huge key, but I don't think it's going to be a drop off between Bechterfield and Kolodziej in terms of defensive line coach.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points there. And I want to start with, because I saw a lot of those same kind of grumblings too, him as a recruiter. And I pushed back a little bit. I didn't do it online just because I didn't want to get in the argument while watching the game last night. But to me, kids coming in, meeting with the strength staff, and as you mentioned, they're around them so much. Yes, it hasn't been on the road, and it hasn't been, that identification process maybe on Kolodziej's plate previously. But I think, when kids come onto campus, he's a big part of the pitch and the recruiting part of it when they're here. So I'm not as worried about him being able to recruit, especially when he's talking about guys in his own position. And I mean, who better than him to kind of give guys an accurate representation of what their offseason is going to be like, what's their day-to-day, what's their training expectation, all that type of stuff, than the guy who's been directing it. And I mean, we're hopefully going to learn more about how they're going to structure this, if they're going to hire a new strength and conditioning person, or if it's going to be a combo of guys that are already on staff taking over. But I mean, you've got to imagine he's still going to have some say in what's going on there, and his expertise there is still going to be used. So, I mean, I think that's going to end up being a strength of his in the recruiting sense, is that he can give guys a really clear picture of what they'll do with them and how they develop guys at Wisconsin. And I think when you're in the situation where Wisconsin's at right now, which, I mean, everybody kind of knows, like, historically hasn't been a program that wants to pay exorbitant amounts of money for an assistant coach. But at the same time, to have a guy that's got the ties with the school, I mean, now they've got 6 alumni on the coaching staff. I mean, obviously he was already here, but it's kind of a little bit different, not exactly a coach, but 6 alumni on the coaching staff, and then a guy that's clearly been a key in developing this program and developing guys that are here into better players. So I think that's only going to help this D-line group, which, when you look at it right now with the losses of Isaiah Loudermilk going to the NFL, Garrett Rand stepping away because of injuries, and then, guys behind them getting hurt this year, there's a lot of work to be done in that group. I think that's going to be a really big key this offseason, is finding new guys at defensive end and some of these other positions to really solidify that front that's been so good for the last couple of years. So I think this is as good of a fit as you're going to get, outside of bringing in like a big name. But I just, throughout what we know about where the program stands right now and all the things that are going on financially, I didn't think that was all that realistic, that they were going to go make a big splash hire to fill that spot. So I think this is a nice fit for them. And I think this is going to work out well if they find some type of situation on the strength and conditioning side that continues that development. That's kind of their hallmark.
Yeah, I'm not worried about him as a recruiter. I've always thought recruiting is like knowing what you're selling, and he's a guy from Stevens Point who played here and has been here for a while now. He knows the program. He knows what he's selling. And the other thing is just personality. And Ross, I've talked to him a couple times over the years for stories, and he's always been, he strikes me as bright and creative. He thinks outside the box, very personable. So I have no problem. I have no doubt that he'll be able to go into a living room and sell this program. So I think it's a good fit. I kind of wish I would have considered it, like when we were bouncing ideas around, because it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think you always hear about this at different levels of football, that guys that work like on the special team side work with everybody on the team, and that helps them if they get to like a head coach or a coordinator type of spot. Same thing for the strength and conditioning. I mean, he's been working hands-on with guys all across his team. You saw the reaction from a lot of players on Twitter last night, very excited about him getting this chance. And I think that the concerns that are out there, I guess, are fair just because he doesn't have the experience. But I think you brought a good point. Like, if you've got the talent and you've got the passion for the place like he does and Jim Leonard did before him, it's only going to help you, and it's going to make you successful if you put the work in. And I don't think that's really a question. So I'm interested to see what he does with this group, because like I said, there's a lot of questions to be answered, but this is, I think, a really good situation for them to continue what they've been doing on defense, because as we've seen, the continuity of this defense and guys sticking around and this, what they've been building there is the reason that they're in the top 5, top 10 of all the major statistics. So I think this is going to help them continue that. All right, let's jump into basketball here, Jim. Lorne, so I want to start with Lorne Bowman just because it was kind of the breaking news after the second half went really heavy Wisconsin's way. It was closer for a little bit in the first half, but then the Badgers kind of pulled away from Northwestern at the Kohl Center. So Lorne Bowman's re-enrolled back at Wisconsin after the news came out early in the semester that he had pulled himself out of the university to deal with a personal family matter. Greg Gard said that he's not sure when he's going to be back on the court or with the team. So that's, a secondary issue. Nice that he's back. I guess just what's your read on the situation, and what are the Badgers hopefully going to get with Bowman being back in the fold potentially?
Yeah, I think this is I think it's a good step. It's a positive step. I was going to ask Greg Gard about it today, actually Thursday, in our pre-Ohio State interviews, but someone beat me to it last night. I'm glad they did, because I had heard this week that he's re-enrolled in school, which was news. And there's also been some other positive signs. His dad on social media posted pictures of him and Lorne II. His dad's also named Lorne. So Lorne Sr. and Lorne II were out in Arizona working out, which was another of my questions. Is I didn't know how much basketball he had been getting in during this time away from the program. So it appears that he's doing more there. The family's been very tight-lipped, and I respect their privacy. I've reached out like 3 times to the dad, and he's not returned my messages, which is fine. It's trying not to pry, and yet it's my job to ask for updates if and when they'll give them. Greg Gard last night basically said, some of this is out of his hands. He said it was a positive step, or first step to get him back in school. I think it's too early to speculate about what goes on from this point forward. I mean, it's, as we know, the point guard situation next year is completely up in the air. There's just so much we don't know. We know Chucky Hepburn's coming in, a really talented point guard from Nebraska. We know Bowman could be back and still would be considered a freshman. What we don't know is, do any of the seniors now come back next year? I mean, does a Trevor Anderson decide he wants to play one more year? Does Brad Davison decide he wants to play one more year? I've even heard speculation that Trice might consider coming back. I think that's highly unlikely. I just think he's going to be 25 years old when next season starts. I think he wants to go start making some money, and I think he's obviously playing really well. I don't think he'll come back. If nobody comes back from this team and they're left with a true freshman or two, I think they might kick the tires on a grad transfer. I think they'll look around and try to get some experience in the backcourt. And then there's also the possibility that there's a non-point guard on the roster right now that could help. I think Johnny Davis could play some point guard. I think Tyler Wahl in a pinch could play some point guard. It's just, some of these questions are stuff they'll be deciding in months from now, and I think they want to focus on the season. So
right.
I understand why fans are interested, but at the very least, I think this is a good positive step that Bowman's back in classes for his own good. Forget about whether he plays for Wisconsin or when he plays for Wisconsin. I think for his own, it's a good positive step for him that he's getting back in school and things are returning semi-normal for him. I mean, he's going to be taking classes virtually back at his home in Detroit. So he's not back on campus, but this is a good step.
Yeah, for sure. And I think anytime that you have a situation like this where you just don't really know what's going on, you got to be sensitive to it, because you just don't have an answer of what he's been dealing with. But yeah, like you said, it's nice that this semester seems hopefully get him back on the track of where he wants to be. Because, from what you reported back when you were writing stories about this class coming in, like he was kind of he was a little bit later than the first crew.
He was the first one.
It was one of the two. So he was the first one. So obviously he was excited to come and wanted to be part of this. And, hopefully everything works out for him, that can be a reality coming up next year. So as you said, good first step for him. Let's jump back onto the court here. We saw Wisconsin rattle off 2 wins up at Rutgers last week, and then Northwestern at home on Wednesday night. And you got it in our show notes, Jim, and I think that was pretty apparent. Getting the balance back on offense, getting more guys contributing than just Trice and Potter has really become the key for this team last night against Northwestern. 4 guys were in double figures. And then both games, actually, 4 guys getting to double figures. So what do you think has been the key to that happening and getting more guys involved and shots falling for guys that maybe were starting off the season a little cold?
Yeah, I think that's what you just nailed on the head. I think
Okay.
I don't know if they're doing anything different to get guys. I mean, I think Dimitri Trice is aware of the fact that part of his job as a point guard is to get others involved, and I think he's trying to do that. I don't think he was the problem before. I think like the offense was running through him because he was hitting almost everything he threw up, and
Right.
but I just think I don't think that was sustainable. I just think that teams are going to try to take Trice out of it, and the other guys need to step up. So you look like, Tyler Wahl last night, I thought did a really good job. Brad Davison has played better offensively the last 2 games. He's been in double figures both games. So, when you looked at this team back in October and even last season, they're capable of putting 5-6 guys in double figures, and that just makes them so difficult to defend. So I like the fact that we're just seeing more of that this year, or these last couple of games. I just like the fact that they are a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, and as I'm watching that game last night, I thought one of the big things, and you do a better film breakdown than I would, but I felt like guys were moving without the ball a little bit better. I felt like at times, because Trice was so hot and, they kind of just let him go, I thought there was a little bit of ball watching with him, but I thought guys were moving without the ball a little bit better, making cuts. And I think especially Johnny Davis, a couple of times, I think it might have been the first half, a couple of backdoor cuts, one that ended up being a dunk for him. I just think that's when this team's playing its best, and that's hard to do. That takes discipline, and it's hard to do night in, night out. Just be that active. But when, as we talked about in many podcasts, like when you get up against some of these more athletic teams, that's where you got to beat them. You have to beat them with the effort and the discipline to continue running the offense and not just try to rely on one guy. So I think we're getting closer to where we thought this team was going to be, in the sense of this many guys contributing and this many guys being able to come off the bench maybe, or, play a role that for whatever time that they play is pretty high level and gets points on the boards or gets rebounds. Just the last couple of games that are a much better look for this team than what they looked like at Michigan, where it seemed like they're kind of lost and then the effort just wasn't there defensively.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that was missing in the Michigan game, you mentioned the backdoor cuts last night, and I thought that was one thing. Like, when a defense like Michigan is so aggressive and puts so much pressure on you, high up on the court, you need to find ways to counter that with backdoor cuts, and they weren't able to do that. I think we've seen a little bit more the last couple games is they will have guys moving better off the ball, like you said. Even like last night, Davison, there was a couple times where I thought he made some sharp cuts and drew fouls on cuts where Northwestern was holding him. So, that doesn't show up in a box score necessarily, but it's a sign that that they are moving a little bit better. And I think that's important. I thought they played really well offensively last night, save for, there was a stretch early in the second half where they just got jump shot happy.
Right.
And, that's always a difficult thing too, because I haven't gone back and watched it, but just in real time, a lot of the shots were open, right? I mean,
yeah, they were good shots. A lot of them.
Yeah, so it's not like they're forcing 3-point shots; they're taking what's given to them. But I do think, like, at some point when you continue to miss them, you got to go back inside. And I thought Trevor Anderson coming in the game last night, which usually happens. I mean, Trevor Anderson this offense runs better when he's on the court. And again, it did last night. He cuts, he moves really well. He kind of gets this offense going. So I thought having him in the game last night sparked something, and they got a few baskets inside, and then that we're able to build a lead that they were, that lasted.
Yeah, for sure. And you got in our notes here, and I think that's a good point. This defense played a lot better than obviously they looked against Michigan, where they just seemed like they were lost, as I mentioned. But it seems like at times, or for at least stretches of the game, teams can get to the rim. And I mean, even Northwestern, we got some solid guards on the back end or in the backcourt, but they're not going to be blowing by a ton of guys throughout the year. But they were still able to get to the rim at points against Wisconsin. And do you think that's a big concern going forward, or do you think it's just they were playing well enough at other spots that maybe they weren't rotating to get back and help?
It's bizarre. You look at Wisconsin. If you look at Ken Pom, Wisconsin is number 5 nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency. So you look at that and say, wow, this is a really good defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think in watching the games, all of us can see with our own eyes that there are times when it does not look like a good defense at all. And part of it is what you said, like they're just giving up too many points in the paint. Rutgers had 42, and Greg Gard wasn't all that concerned about it because it's a Rutgers team that can just do that. They have guys that attack. They have Miles Johnson in the middle, who is, basically he gets these lobs and it's almost unstoppable. So he wasn't overly concerned. Last night they gave up 18 points in the paint in the first half, which is a really high number against a team like that. Second half was much better. So they're capable of playing great defense. They're also capable of playing really sloppy defense. And the difference between how good this team can be is probably going to be, can they be closer to the great than they are the sloppy? They have to do it in longer stretches. That's, to me, they have to be more consistent doing it. And I don't know what the answer is because, like I said, when they buckle down and are focused and follow the rules, they can be really good.
Yeah, and I wonder, because it was funny. I know this has become kind of a running joke on Twitter during games, but like the amount of times they talked about how much basketball these guys have played together and how much experience this team has, it's just like, yeah, we got it. Let's move on. But when you know that about yourselves and you have that confidence in each other, do you think there's almost a little bit of like, all right, let's play for the next like 5-6 minutes. It's a little bit of like a switch flip. Like, all right, we're going to lock down here and maybe let up a little bit later. Like, do you think this team's got a little bit of that in them where they know they can do it, so they don't always like they put it on in spurts?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair theory, and it's hard to say whether that's the case or not, but it's got to be something because there are too many poor stretches from this team, and they've largely survived those, but a couple times it's caught them, and you kind of leave games. I know fans are. I think the expectations for this team were enormous, obviously, based on how they finished last year. And so you're kind of judging them by that. You're judging them by the last 8 games last year to some degree. And whether that's fair or not is open for debate. I still don't know what to make of this team. We're 16 games in or 15 games in now. And I don't completely know what you're going to get night to night. And for a veteran team, that's probably a little bit concerning. But I still think if you go by how this program has worked, it's been a team that improves as the season goes on and plays some of its best basketball in February and March. So I think that's the reason for hope. I do think they will be better, more experienced down the stretch. And if they can fix some stuff defensively, they have a chance to be really, really good on that end of the court. And that gives them a chance to really beat anybody in this conference.
For sure. Jumping into that, or just on the floor stuff here, just Tyler Wahl has started the last couple of games. Nate Reavers goes to that 6-man role that Wahl is in. What's been your read about what Greg Gard thinks that Wahl's bringing, or maybe that need to give Reavers a break at certain points? Just what's been your read on that situation where Wahl has been starting for Reavers?
I had a hunch last week that it would happen, and it was really strictly matchup based because Rutgers, they play Ron Harper Jr. at the 4, and I don't see how Reavers could have guarded him. It's a horrible matchup. So I did wonder whether they would go to Wahl. So it didn't surprise me. And Greg Gard after the game said basically it was matchup based. So I kind of expected last night to go back to the original starting lineup because Northwestern plays more of a traditional 2 big lineup, and I thought it would go back to Potter and Reavers. But Greg Gard thought differently, and I think that. I think it's clearly because Reavers is struggling so much that he thinks maybe a change of scenery, coming off the bench might trigger something. I thought he was better last night. I thought Reavers was better. So maybe this is the way. It's also tough that when you make a change and you win a game to go back to the old way, right? You kind of want to ride a lineup as long as you can. The crazy thing about this lineup, and I'd written this story on lineups going into the Michigan game, just kind of how Greg Gard comes to these, how there's analytics involved, but he trusts his gut and blah, blah, blah. This lineup that they're starting leading in the Rutgers game was like -20 on the season. It just was not a very productive lineup, right? So it's not something that if you're relying solely on analytics, you'd look at that lineup and say, let's go to that because it's going to work. That's exactly where Greg Gard is kind of following his gut and what he thinks this lineup could do against certain other lineups, and it's worked 2 games in a row. It's been a pretty good lineup for him. So I guess he'll stick with it. I see no reason that he'll go against it. Ohio State's another one where they've got a really interesting lineup. They're out of point guards right now because of injuries. And so they have a shooting guard playing point guard, and then he's surrounded by like 4 forward type guys. So I'll be interested to see what they do. I'm guessing he'll stick with what's working and stick with Wahl in the starting lineup.
And I mean, it's hard to argue with what Wahl's done with these starts. I mean, last night it was a career high, right? 14 points.
Yeah, 14. Yeah.
And Wahl has kind of established himself as he's going to be an effort guy and get you rebounds and can guard multiple positions and things. And I don't know, it's to your point. Sometimes you got to ride a lineup out, and it's tough to be like, all right, Tyler, good job with those couple of games. Now go back to the bench and kind of adjust yourself again. I don't know. I think Tyler Wahl could probably do that, but as you said, do you risk that when it's working? It's kind of one of those tough coaching decisions. And, as you said, Nate Reuvers looked better than I think he had in the last couple of games, and definitely was shooting a little bit more confidently than I think he had in the last week or so. So maybe it worked out for both guys that maybe Reuvers kind of reads the game from the bench in the first few minutes and sees where he can attack, and just a little bit of a different look for both those guys.
Yeah, we haven't talked to Reuvers since he got benched, but I was watching last night, and obviously we're pretty far away, but I was watching the Jumbotron, and right before the starting tip, like where guards kind of give him the final words and stuff, he patted Micah Potter on the shoulder and said, go win the tip, so it's not like it's a guy who's lost his job and is sulking. I think he's really been into it on the bench. I think when he's gone in the game, he's provided some energy. So I think it was a positive step last night. I mean, I put this in the show notes, but they need him. I mean, if this team's going to maximize its potential, they need Nate Reuvers to be good. I mean, they just can't have him struggling. I mean, he's too good of a player. They need all hands on deck, and he certainly is one of the key hands.
And it's going to be interesting when they get closer to tournament time, and God knows what the Big Ten tournament's going to look like, if there is one, or how it's all going to go. But just that 2 big lineup that's been talked about ever since Potter got eligible. You did a really good breakdown out of it. It's not all that effective, especially on defense. Like it's not a good defensive lineup, even though you would think maybe they're just 2 towers at the rim, whatnot. But I just wonder if they ever have to resort to that, because you look at the best teams in the conference and around the country, like they're playing 1 big, if that, pretty much the entire game. Like I just don't see a lot of opportunities for Reuvers and Potter to be on the floor together against some of the better teams they're going to play going forward.
Yeah, and I think, the one thing that works too is that sometimes when you have both those guys in the game to start, they each pick up a foul, and then you're kind of, you're in a position, you're in a pinch in terms of how do we do the rotations now, because you have to worry about foul trouble. The one thing I like is Potter can go play 4 minutes, Reuvers comes in for him. You can almost interchange those guys, and that I think it works. In a perfect world, yes, you look at those 2 when they're both playing well. They're 2 of your 5 best players, and you want them on the court at the same time. It just makes sense, right? But it just hasn't worked out that way. And you mentioned defense before. Offensively, the numbers just for some reason don't work out. I think a lot of that is Reuvers struggling, obviously, but this team hasn't been great out of the gates, and that's where a lot of those together possessions come. I mean, they play 6 or 7 possessions together at the beginning of the game, and if you're only scoring 2 points before that first media timeout, that really drives down the points per possession numbers. So
right,
I think what they have right now is they've found something. We'll see how long he sticks with it, but I'm interested. It was interesting that he made the change and then stuck with it. I thought that was a really interesting move.
Yeah, no doubt. We mentioned Dimitri Trice a couple of times throughout this podcast already, but the TV broadcast talked about this a little bit last night as well. But the work that Dimitri Trice did this offseason, especially around the rim, it seems to be something that I wouldn't say transformed his game, but it just made him such a more effective scorer, in that when he drives, it's not always he's looking to dump it off or looking for somebody to kick out to. It is hey, I'm looking to score first. And then if you cut that off, you've left somebody else open. And I think that's really opened up what they can do offensively, because they only have, him basically and Johnny Davis that are going to be really big threats against your better teams on the dribble. So I think that part of his game, and I want to hear your take on this, Jim, but that part of his game has really expanded this offense, I feel like.
Yeah, and I was going to say that it's been the missing piece for him too. It was something he struggled with. He was getting there at times previously, but not finishing. I think he was below 40% on 2-point shots, and a lot of those were kind of in the paint at the rim. It just makes him unpredictable too. Like, I think we've seen hundreds of possessions throughout his career where shot clock's winding down, the ball's in his hands, and one of two things is going to happen. He's going to shoot a three, or he's going to kind of shoot that 15, 17-foot pull-up jumper. Now he's getting to the rim, and he's able to finish there. I think that as a defender, you just kind of don't know. Like, you could kind of almost predict and contest that pull-up jumper because that's what's coming. Now you've got to be uncertain a little bit, and it puts you on your heels as a defender. And he's been able to finish at the rim a couple times late in shot clocks because of that. He uses hesitation moves where I think he gets you thinking that he's going to pull up and then goes right past you and using his left hand. So, I mean, I'll have people read the story if they haven't already, but a lot of this traces back to his off season, which he worked out with a guy, Xander Smart, in a warehouse in the middle of Dayton. It's just really interesting. And it's, as Xander described it, it's kind of a dingy place, but kind of it was a cool vibe just because you're there and you're working on your game 5 days a week, and it's all business. So I encourage people to kind of read that, because I think that's, I think this was the off season. Dimitri Trice has always been a hard worker. I think this is the off season where he really came out of it with really improved skills, and it's translating to gameplay.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I think kind of came through your story was like something that he knew was holding him back, and he just attacked it, and he's got the advantage that, they showed a little bit on the broadcast last night too. He has a professional basketball playing brother that can guard him one-on-one, and you can really test, like, hey, against a guy that's at this level, can this work? And I think it was in the first half. I know he had one in the second half too, but he's using angles really high off the board. That's super effective for him, because he's not the tallest guy and not always going to create a huge amount of separation off the dribble. But when you change those angles, it not only affects what the defender can do against you, but it changes when they have to jump to try to contest the shot. And I think you said it really well there, making himself unpredictable, even as a finisher. And that's something that's making him really hard to guard. And what's he up to? Like 17 points a game right now, 18 points a game?
I think he's under 15, but for the season, but that's jumped. I mean, he's almost 20 for the last 7 games.
Yeah, right. So I think it's translating in a lot of ways that's made him a lot better of a player. And as you mentioned earlier in the show, just somebody that I think with that part of his game now, and then you assume continuing to get a little bit better as he gets further along in his career, that's something that makes him, I think, more of a pro prospect than maybe he was 8-9 months ago.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he talked about how he's worked on finishing high off the glass, but yet keeping it, the trick there is soft, like you want to be finesse almost. And that's one thing they worked on, like this, you can read the story, but they wouldn't count makes unless they were swishes. If they were finesse, they had to be finesse finishes. Like if they touched the rim, they didn't count it in these little mini competitions between Dimitri and his older brother. And then towards the end of the interview, I asked Xander, I'm like, Xander, like this is all great that you're working on this stuff, but is there a big man involved? Like, because once he gets in Big Ten play or college play, like there's a 6'10" guy standing there. How do you do that? And he's like, well, it's funny you ask. Like he would use a foam roller, this 3-foot foam roller, and basically that was Xander's defense around the rim, and so Travis and Dimitri had to get the ball even higher because they had this foam roller there to deflect shots. So I just thought it was, I was really glad I reached out to Xander, because it was interesting how these players kind of what they do. It was a weird off season, right?
Yeah.
So how did they do it? What did they do to get better? And clearly Trice is better. He's made another step this season, and I think those days in the warehouse are a big reason why.
Yeah, absolutely. let's jump forward here as we look at this next week or 2 weeks, I should say. Kind of an important stretch when you look at the Big Ten Conference as a whole, because as you've mentioned a couple of times in podcasts this month, Jim, you got to, in this conference, you've got to win some of these games or win games that you're expected to, right? Like for Wisconsin, the next few games, they got Ohio State, Maryland, Penn State, potentially, or is it for sure twice with the reschedule now?
Yep.
Yeah,
Two
okay.
Penn State games.
So all of those games are winnable. I mean, Penn State's at the bottom of the conference. Maryland's a tough team, as we know, and we've seen them beat some better teams. Ohio State's pretty solid this season, but all winnable games for Wisconsin. And when you've got your Illinois, your Iowa, your Michigan rematch, like when you have those really big games coming up after that, you've got to give yourself some cushion in those Big Ten standings if you want to be one of those double bye teams coming up for the tournament in a month or so.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like you look at these next four, and I don't even know what I predict that they would go in. It's so hard to predict, like in this league. But let's just say they do win all four. Like beating Ohio State, sweeping Penn State, and winning. Kind of getting revenge and winning that game at Maryland. Then all of a sudden you're 10-2 going into that final 8-game stretch, and that final 8-game stretch includes 2 games against Illinois, 2 games against Iowa, another game against Michigan. You got to go to Purdue. So it's brutal. It's a brutal final stretch. And Michigan has the benefit of Michigan does not go to Iowa this year. They did not go to Illinois this year. So, you're kind of running out of games for Michigan to slip up in. So you got to keep pace. And that's why I think these next 4 are important. Like, obviously, Wisconsin doesn't think of this in terms of a 4-game stretch. They're solely focused on Ohio State. But I think the rest of us can kind of look at this stretch and say, hey, you have to go at least 3-1. But going 4-0 would at least put you in position. And then, but what really has to happen, like we talked about earlier, is you want to keep making strides towards playing your best. Because I still think this team at its best can compete with anybody, whether it's Illinois, Iowa, Michigan. We just haven't seen it enough to be fully confident in it. So you're hoping these next 4 games that, not only do you win, but you continue to figure out who you are a little bit.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things, and it's not even something that you can ensure will happen, but the good looks that they were getting against Northwestern, especially in the second half, that weren't falling, like once those start going down, I think that's when you're going to see this team really explode. And it kind of follows the similar path as last year. They hit those low points, and then shots finally started to go. Their defense continued to be, top tier level defense. I think that's one of those areas that once this team starts spreading around the more consistent shot making. I mean, it's funny when you see Tyler Wahl start to be a little more confident shooting some of these more open threes, and a guy you wouldn't really expect there. But so far, it's really been Potter and Aleem Ford's been stepping out a little bit more and making some shots. I think once it's spread out a little more evenly on that 3-point line, that's when you're going to see this team really kind of become that ceiling that they have.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've seen it in doses this year, but not consistently. And, last year, that last 8 games, they were really, really good offensively. And so maybe they're kind of building towards that. I think that's, if you're a Badger fan, that's what you hope. It's there. I mean, it's not like it's not real. It's there. They've done it enough that it's not a fluke. But they're just going to they're going to play really well down the stretch to have a chance of winning this conference and setting themselves up for a good seed in the NCAA tournament.
For sure. So they play Saturday, right?
Saturday against Ohio State. Yep. Gotcha.
Okay. Make sure you're following along on madison.com for all Jim's stories. I mean, obviously you have the game stuff from last night, but the Dimitri Trice story about finishing at the rim heading into that game was really good, as we just talked about that for the last few minutes here. But a lot of more stuff coming from Jim with all those games coming up. And as we mentioned, this is a decisive run of this season. If the Badgers are good, then they put themselves in a good position. And if they're not, then you got some question marks going into some of those big games in February. So, Jim, just as a reporter, is this the fun part of the season where you've got some last few, I guess, prove yourself games, and then you've got the big matchups with Iowa and Illinois and all those teams we were talking about? Or is this like, all right, let's get to those bigger games?
I don't know. It's weird. Like these seasons are so long sometimes that you kind of go through stages. And personally, like I'm coming off a week on the road, so I feel like I'm still catching up mentally from that. I feel like I've hit a wall a little bit. But then you're right, the games get bigger and more important, and then the storylines get a little bit more easier to write, and then it gets better. So I'm looking forward to it. Like part of me is this, as this, it's been a challenge to cover this team this season, right? When you're just not around players. I haven't physically talked one-on-one with a player except for over the phone. So it's been a challenge, and I'm not trying to whine about it, but it hasn't been easy, and I want things to go back to normal just like everybody else does in this world. So it's not like I want the season to end, because I still think it could be a pretty special season, but I keep thinking ahead, and it's the fact that the whole thing's going to be in Indiana. The Big Ten tournament might get moved to Indiana. I think some people.
Yeah, I saw that too.
So it's like, like I'm just trying to plan out my life a little bit. Like, do I just go to Indiana on March, 15th and stay there until further notice? Who knows? So I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Absolutely. All right. So make sure on madison.com, keeping up with all that stuff with basketball coming up, and also hockey too. Hockey's in full swing. The women's Badgers hockey is number one in the nation. Men's Badger hockey coming off some COVID stuff and couple of missed games in the last week or so, but Tom Leslie's got a lot of stuff there you can read on madison.com as well. A little bit slower month for me, but we got some stuff coming up for you. A little surprise Packer story about some fan reaction to hosting the NFC Championship game coming up on Sunday. So a lot of stuff on madison.com you guys can check out. I gotta tell you, Jim, I don't like how confident these people are that I've been talking to. Confidence is not a good thing in Wisconsin sports history.
Yeah, that surprises me.
I know. I've been kind of setting people up, waiting for the typical, like, oh, I don't know, I'm nervous type of stuff. And they're all like, no, I feel pretty good. We have Aaron Rodgers, which is a fair answer. I'm just surprised by it.
Yeah, I almost wondered, like the last week's game against the Rams was a little too easy, right? I mean, it was a little bit, it was a one-score game in the second half, but then, stress-free down the stretch. And you wonder if, had that game been closer, if people would be a little bit more nervous about this one. I mean, personally, I think it's going to be a really tough game. This Tampa Bay team scares the heck out of me. Tom Brady is a born winner. He's got a lot of threats around him. This defense is really good. I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I'm with you. The things that annoy me, like I've been watching, one of my best friends in the world is a big Tampa Bay fan, so I've been watching a lot of their games. It annoys the hell out of me how they just beat themselves all the time. Yeah. Like they end up winning some of these games that they have like 10 or 11 penalties and all this dumb crap that they do to shoot themselves in the foot. And you do 3 or 4 of those things against the Packers, I think you pretty much guarantee a loss. So I'd be really interested to see how they clean some of that stuff up. That's been a season-long issue against a really disciplined team. Because I feel like the Packers, really their biggest issue has been kind of letting their foot off the gas in the second half. And I've got to imagine Super Bowl on the line, that won't happen. So I think the Packers win, but I'm with you that I think it's going to be pretty close.
And we're officially a Packers podcast.
And we are. All right. Not that there's, 17 of those you guys could probably go listen to. So, all right, we'll wrap it up here. Make sure you're following Jim on Twitter, Jim Polzin, WSJ. You can follow me on Twitter as well, CBart, WSJ. Lots of stuff coming throughout this weekend, as I mentioned. So for Jim Polzin, I'm Colten Bartholomew. Thank you guys very much for listening.